Yeah, I've got to be honest. So I'm not in a pretrial agency, but so we supervise offenders that are in the communities, either returning from prisons, or returning to the communities from jails or prisons, or those that are sentenced to the community in lieu of jails or prisons. But within our agency, we have an independent agency that's pretrial services. So they do pretrial. So some or all of what I'll say is relevant here. I'm going to skip the background of our agency, and the two things I really want to talk about are how the CSOSA manages and sustains our offenders in the communities, and sketch out some pathways for effective community corrections. So how do we manage and sustain our offenders in the communities? I mean, this depends largely on our ability to assess risk and needs. So we assess our offenders early and frequently. So at intake, we assess them, and at least every 180 days, we assess them. And these assessments tell us who we need to target, but also, what it is that we need to target, what type of interventions. But they also tell us, how we need to tailor our interventions for the specific characteristics of the offender. So we assess risk to identify who's posing the greatest risk to the public, and so we can identify those offenders. And it's not just for economy. I mean, we know that if we target those highest risk offenders, that we've got the greatest chance of minimizing recidivism. So our tool has about 350 items, and there's a broad range, about 7 or 8 large groups that we look for. So with those 350 screener items, we take a statistical approach that you heard about earlier, and we have an ensemble of approaches. So we reduce the dimensionality of the data. What we're trying to do is identify some of the trends to say, what is it that makes somebody more likely to commit a different, like a type of crime or act of noncompliance. We've got a slew of outcomes that we look at. We rely on committee models, particularly random forests. So what we do, our models generate a continuous score, and we partition that score into custodial levels, like from minimum, medium, maximum, and intensive. And so our highest risk offenders get our most intensive forms of custody, and our lowest risk offenders get our lowest forms. And it's important to point out that those cut points, the way that we partition that risk up, are purposely designed to maintain our long-run expectations of our caseload. That's how we allocate it. This is just a graph that kind of shows our current offenders and how they're partitioned up by risk level. So risk tells us who we need to target. We focus on those highest risk offenders, but we also assess some criminogenic factors. These are characteristics of the offenders that are linked with offending, but the important characteristic about them is that we can change those characteristics. They're treatable. And so the idea is that if we focus our interventions on those criminogenic needs, those things that are linked with criminality and that can be changed, that we alter we affect the likelihood of future criminality or offending. So at CSOSA, rather than providing a general treatment for offenders, what we do is we target specific criminogenic needs, and we meet those needs with specific types of interventions. Some examples of criminogenic needs that we look at, there's a lot, but here's some, like low self-control, anger, substance use, academic achievement. So, one you might see, like unemployment. People might say, well, you need to focus on getting these people jobs so that we can reduce their likelihood of criminality. But we try to focus on the root cause of the problems. I mean, some of the things that you can focus on might be symptoms, like not having a job, but really the reason might be something deeper, like, well, not having job skills or cognitive deficits or poor problem-solving skills. So those are the things that we try to address with our interventions. This graphic here just kind of really simplifies how we prioritize treatment at CSOSA. Our risk assessments identify the needs, and derived from the risk assessment is an automated structured intervention plan that says, this is the offender's needs, lists them out, and these are the types of treatments that are designed to affect those needs. And that's automated, but our supervision officers can and do alter that and prioritize those treatments, and they also update the intervention plan as the offenders move through our treatment process. And so ultimately we try to connect our offenders with cognitive behavioral-based therapies, because those are the types of therapies that have shown to be most effective for offenders. So we assess risk to identify who to target, and we assess needs to say what it is that we need to target. But we also assess some non-criminogenic types of characteristics. These are things that, may not be directly linked with offending, but we have to address them first because it might affect either how they respond to treatment or how we ought to deliver the treatment. So we can find out from these non-criminogenic factors, well, how long do we need to expose them to treatment? For what duration, how intense? Some of the non-criminogenic factors that I'm talking about might be learning disabilities or housing instability, self-esteem, motivation for change. I'll talk a little bit about in a second. But the whole idea is that we need to tailor our interventions. Once we've identified the high risk, once we've identified those with a particular need, we need to tailor our interventions to be suitable for that type of offender. Here's an example. Let's say we have our caseload that's distributed by risk again. These purple dots might represent offenders that have a particular need, like substance abuse treatment. We know we're going to focus on our high-risk offenders, and of those, we could send them all to treatment, but we know that that doesn't really work that well because some of them may not be motivated to change. So if we send them all to treatment, we know that a lot of them are going to fail anyway. But those that are not motivated to change, we can't send directly to treatment. So what we do, we send those that are ready into treatment, but some of the others, we have a treatment readiness program. So we send them to this readiness regime in our reentry and sanction center and prepare them for treatment and then send them on. The idea is that we'll have better success in treatment. Silly graphic, but. So another strategy that we use is we try to put our high-risk offenders on teams that have really low caseloads. Their workloads are high, but they're able to focus more attention on those high-risk offenders. We have some specialized units that address problematic segments of our population, like young adults. We also use sanctions and incentives to respond quickly to non-compliance, but also to positive behaviors. And I could talk later about some of the strategies that we're implementing now and some tools that we're trying to put together. But what I want to get to now is some pathways that will take us to more effective community corrections. Researchers in this field have a difficult time because a lot of times we have trouble finding significant effects. And a lot of times that's a result because we implement really small interventions and we have to face it that these are relatively intractable problems to solve. But we can work towards that by building a richer data repertoire. We're drowning in official data. We know who's arrested, what they're arrested for, when they get convicted, but we really don't have that much data on their social interactions and so forth. And we have to remember that these are community penalties. And so we want to understand our interventions and the social milieu of the offenders. Deepening our conceptualization of particularly our outcomes. We tend to think in dichotomies like complete success or complete failure. And it's not really, that's not really a good picture because it's not just whether they offend or whether they begin using substances again, but how soon and to what extent. So we try to tease out how frequently or how serious reoffending or continued substance abuse is. Are they escalating or de-escalating? Are they specializing or are they becoming more general? But the point is we try to develop a picture of individual continuity and change over time. Developing thoughtful interventions. These are interventions that we need to aim specifically at reducing risk. We try to focus on the underlying problems and not those symptoms. And to get there, we need more clear and reliable, particularly evaluative information. We're trying to unpack the black box. It's not enough to say whether a program is working or not. We need to find out, well, how and why, and for why is it working better for some people and not for others. Introducing more like richer, rigorous evaluations. I'm talking specifically about randomized controlled trials and prospective longitudinal designs. Taking the risk to innovate, we need a greater range of community-based options that are feasible, cost-effective, but most importantly, broadly useful. We're all working towards common goals. So if we work together, we can help. So the last point is binding research with practice. there's a lot of research out there, but it's not diffusing into practice and policy. So if we develop more collaborative framework to share research and diffuse what we know to the policymakers, one way to get at that, obviously developing forums for sharing information, but also allegiances to share data and share resources among all these entities. So that's really all I have. Okay, thank you.